Welcome back to my channel for this week's Human Design Transit Report. And today is Thursday, January 26th. Now, the timing is off just a little bit. Usually I release these on Monday, but I released one over the last weekend because it was the Human Design New Year. And so I wanted to give that to you right away. So if you want to know where we're at right now, you can go and watch that video I did about the Human Design New Year, which is the transit that started last Sunday. So you can go and check it out right here. And then the upcoming transit starts on Saturday, the 28th. Okay, let's get into it. So this Saturday on the 28th, the sun is going to move into the gate 19 and the earth is going to move into the gate 33. So let's talk about the gate 33 and the earth first. So the gate 33 in traditional human design is known as privacy, and in quantum human design is known as retelling. It is on the throat center. It's in the sensing circuit. So it's collective circuitry, but it's in the sensing circuit, which is right-brained energy. And it's a storytelling gate. It's one of the 3 storytelling gates in the chart. All of the storytelling gates are in the sensing circuit. So the right-brained energy is creative, it's expansive, it's experiential, it's embodied, it's spacious. And so it helps us to really understand things through the lens of our own personal experiences, through our reflection on our experiences, which is the stories that we tell, through our embodied experience, through our creativity, which gets downloaded through this right brain sensing circuit. And so the storytelling that's going on here is kind of specific because it's about retelling. And the way that I like to think about this is that we have stories that we live inside of kind of habitually, right? We have stories about who we are. We have stories about where we came from, who our parents were, what our community was like when we were growing up, about what's possible, about what the potential is, what limitations are, and all that, right? We live inside of a lot of stories that dictate our perception about the world, right? It's part of our default lens, right? It's the lens through which we see things. And a lot of times those stories that are our default lens, we're not even super aware that they're there, right? Until you have this moment where you're like, oh, wow, is that really just a story? I thought that's just the way things are. I thought that was the truth. And now all of a sudden I see that that's actually a story. So this happens a lot of times, when we're growing up. And, Santa Claus, right? This is a simple one, right? You might have grown up with Santa Claus or the Tooth Fairy or something like that, right? And then there's this moment when all of a sudden you're like, oh, there's really no Santa Claus? There's really no Tooth Fairy? I mean, I remember watching it happen to my kid. I don't remember it for myself. But that's one of those moments where something that you thought was really true and that you were invested in, all of a sudden you realize it's just a story. So those might seem like kind of simple, silly examples, but I think that they make the point well, that you can think about times in your own life when you've had kind of an awakening, right? You've had something that all of a sudden showed up to you and you went, oh, that's really different than I thought it was. Sometimes this happens when we have really unpleasant moments of betrayal, right? It's like you thought your relationship with somebody was a certain way and you were living inside of that story, and then you realize, oh, it's not like that. I didn't realize that, right? And so that's one of those moments also. And these moments happen with some regularity in our lives if we are continuing to engage and to grow and evolve and all of that, right? Because that means that our perspective is going to continue to expand so that we can see more and more different perspectives. So then the question is when you have one of those moments and you're like, wow, things are really different than the way I thought they were, how do you retell your story, right? What are you going to say about it now? How are you going to change your understanding of what was true in the past? Now, sometimes it can go the other way around. I just mentioned kind of sad or disruptive, uncomfortable situations, but it can also happen the other way around. Like when somebody's behavior, you don't understand, like why your mom was like that while you were growing up. And then you get to be older and you're like, oh yeah, thanks mom. Actually, now I get it. Because when you're an adolescent or a young person, a lot of times you don't have a perspective to understand why your parents are doing some of the things that they're doing, right? Why are they making you do this or preventing you from doing that or whatever? But when we get to be older, we can go and look back and go, oh, yeah. And then we retell the story. And we retell the story so that hopefully we can say, yeah, you know what? I learned so much from what my mom did. I didn't know any better. And I really learned from what she told me and the things she didn't let me do. And now I really get it. So this happens in our own lives all the time. But let's remember, this is collective circuitry. It's collective energy. So it's often stories about the collective. And one of the versions of this is to retell history, is to rewrite history, which is something I've been involved in pretty much my entire adult life. I mean, when I went and got my PhD and, did my dissertation and wrote my book, I was telling a different story about U.S. history that had African Americans and slavery right in the center of our understanding of what the United States is. And it's a very different history, right? I mean, I have this defined in my chart. It's actually Uranus is lighting this up, and Uranus is where you're going to be different, right? And so for me, like the kinds of stories that I often was retelling about our history were very different, certainly different than what mainstream history had been up until that time. And we're seeing, debates about this still. We've got a situation going on in Florida here in the United States where the governor wants to outlaw African American studies class, because he says it doesn't have any value. I'm like, well, that's a retelling, isn't it? Right? I can't believe somebody's even doing that, but there it is, right? So, but this is what that energy of that 33 is. I would call that, in my view, really the shadow expression of that 33, because it's where you're taking that retelling to try to manipulate or control other people or situations, right? And we've seen in the last 50 years at least that there's been an emergence of our understanding of how central African Americans have been to the development of everything in the United States. I mean, they're a core group of our population, highly influential. And yet there's still people who want to deny that their history is important. I mean, yeah. So that, to me, that's the shadow aspect, and it's really kind of flying in the face of what has come to be understood as a more accurate history. Okay. So that's an example, right? Which is a collective story, like the story of the United States and what the United States is and what it stands for. And this is being debated a lot in our political sphere right now. So my question for you is twofold, right? One has to do with your own story about yourself and how you might want to take advantage of this energy of the Earth in the Gate 33 to retell some aspect of your story so that it's more empowering for you, right? And it could be a story from when you're a young person. It could be a story of how a relationship turned out. It could be a story of how you relate to your body or your work in the world, or money or resources. It could be any of those things, right? Any kind of big life area where you want to retell your story so that it's more empowering for you, right? But then also, what kind of story are you living inside of having to do with the collective? Wherever you are in the world, I'm talking about the United States because this is what I know the best and it's where I live. But there's stories that are being retold all over the world right now. We look at what's happening in the Ukraine and what are the stories about that and why that's happening and what does it mean? And and how is it influencing people or impacting people, right? And what's the history that was told that led to this situation, right? Because Putin and the Ukrainians have very different stories about the past that they're telling about who the Ukrainian people are and who has the right to sovereignty in that area. So you can look at your own life, your own heritage, your own national origin, the place where you live, and you can look at the relationship, for example, between indigenous people who were there, people who have been immigrants, people who have been colonizers, whatever that might be, and what's been your experience with that, and what's your perspective on that. So we live in a really important time, in my view, for us to be really facing some deeper truths about the histories we've been living inside of and the stories we've been living inside of, so that we can get to a more equitable, regenerative, humane, respectful, caring, compassionate world. And this is going to give you some energy for you to do that, both for yourself and then also in your relationship to the bigger picture. So that's where we're going to be grounding ourselves during this upcoming transit. Then the sun is moving into the gate 19, which is on the root center, and it is in the tribal circuit. It's actually in the commerce business part of the tribal circuit, which I think is kind of funny because it's actually very, very much about relationships. In traditional human design, it's known as the gate of wanting, and in quantum human design, it's known as the gate of attunement, and it's known as a highly, highly sensitive gate. It's half of the channel of love and marriage in traditional human design, and of intimacy and connection in quantum human design. And so it has to do with our intimate relationships. Its partner, the 49, lives on the emotional solar plexus, which is an emotional energy. The root per se isn't so much an emotional energy, but the 19 is attuned to, okay, or is sensitive to the emotional energy of other people, right? Because its mate is the 49 is emotional energy. So that 19 is sensitive to emotional energy. And its really awakened and empowered expression is its ability to be able to be sensitive to the emotional needs of others, the emotional tone and quality, without being overwhelmed by it, without being overstimulated by it, without feeling like you need to protect yourself from it, and so on, right? It's like the ability to be sensitive, but also grounded and centered, and protected inside of your own auric field, right? Which is one of the things I teach a lot about Kundalini Yoga, is how do we actually do that? A lot of people who have this defined in their charts are highly sensitive people. I know some people who are like this. They tend to be extremely sensitive to anything that seems like criticism. And they can also be energetically kind of sensitive to what's going on around them. They can be expressing the disempowered aspects of this energy when they allow themselves to be overwhelmed or overstimulated by other people's emotional energy. And that can actually kind of flip into the shadow aspect if they use that sensitivity that they have, or their sense of overwhelm, to try to get other people to be different than they are. Right? Because that energy feels like too much for them. But this is kind of codependence, right? It's like when, ooh, who you are is triggering for me, so I want you to change, rather than, ooh, who you are is triggering for me, so let me work with my trigger, or let me leave the situation, right? Which is a healthier thing to do than to try to suppress and make the other person bad and wrong. But what the really kind of awakened 19 can show us is what is the kind of emotional foundation that we need for intimacy. Because in this channel for intimacy and connection, right, we want that emotional quality of intimacy, right? It's just so sweet and juicy and heartfelt and pleasurable and nurturing and nourishing and all of that, right? When we have really emotionally aligned, emotionally wise intimacy, right? And that can be with all kinds of different people in our lives. It doesn't have to just be with a lover or a partner. It could be with our kids, it could be with our parents or our siblings, it can be with our really good friends. So we do want to be sensitive to how can we not be codependent, but be in a healthy emotional relationship with other people so that it can go really deep. Now, our ability to do that is going to be partially dependent on the stories that we tell ourselves about who we are, about other people, about what can happen in relationship, about what's safe and what's not safe, and all of that, right? And so we want to have stories about our own personal experience and also about this experience of the collective, and also the stories of the tribe, right? Because the 19 is tribal energy. And that has to do with closer in community and so on, right? Family and so on. Like, what stories are we living inside of about that? Are they going to foster our ability to actually really connect deeply and have intimacy with other people? Or are they going to get in the way, right? Are they basically going to be like, nah, I'm not available. I'm not available for that, right? Because that's sometimes what happens with our stories when, like I said, if you've been betrayed in the past or felt like you were betrayed in the past, right? You can just be like, I am not going there anymore. And then there's no opportunity for intimacy anymore. My invitation to you is to just kind of check that out for yourself. How do you feel about intimacy? Do you have relationships in your life that feel really safe to you, feel really connected? If you have, a spat or an argument or somebody gets triggered, you can circle back around and clear it up and get closer. That's often how we actually develop intimacy, is when we kind of butt heads around something or somebody gets triggered. And then you're able either in the moment to be like, wow, okay, you're triggered. Like, let's just hold space for that and see what's going on, or circle back to it later when the trigger isn't so alive, but to say, hey, what's going on? Did I do something to offend you or to hurt you? Or to say, yeah, I got really triggered because when you did this, it reminds me of this. And, my dad used to always do that. And so it's hard for me to keep perspective when something like that happens. And then you can reconnect. It's repairing. Like, repair is such a huge part of relationships, and it leads to deeper intimacy. And a lot of times we do that through telling our stories, but ideally with a really clear eye, right? We're not locked inside of a pattern so much as, like I said, like there's certain things that I get triggered by because they remind me of certain things that my dad used to do. I don't have that so much anymore, but every once in a while, things like that come up. And I'm like, ouch, ow. Right? And then maybe I, will say something or act some way, and then I'll be like, okay, I need to and I'll be like, yeah, I still have a little wounding around that experience I had with my dad. But you know what? My dad was a great guy. I love him, and he grew a lot, and he stopped being that kind of an asshole by the time I was an adult. And let's have that as my new story about my dad. So this is a great time for you to just kind of be digging in and looking for yourself about, are your stories helping you to have closer, more satisfying, more fulfilling, more intimate relationships with people or not? And if you haven't had a chance already to get my free ebook series, Getting Started with Human Design, and the Reflection Journal, are totally free to you, and I would be happy to share that with you. I'd love it if you would just leave a comment for me about that if you do decide to go ahead and download them, and they can just really help you understand what you see when you're looking at a human design chart, and understand a bit about where the system comes from, and get you started on understanding your human design even more deeply than you already do. Okay, many blessings, much love. Bye for now.